All right, everyone, welcome to today's Skill Up. My name is Emily Sprenger, and I am joined by one of my fabulous colleagues at NU, Dr. Matthew Vartstra. Dr. Vartstra is joining us from the Career Services portion of our NU community. We absolutely want you to have conversation in the chat and ask questions in the chat. You can certainly put your questions in the Q&A, but I will keep an eye on that as the session proceeds. And then just know that our closed caption is available to you. So if you'd like to utilize that, you can select show CC at the bottom of your Zoom. And if you need anything technically speaking throughout today's session, you can privately message me in the chat and I can help assist you if needed. All right, Dr. Vartstra, without further ado, I've covered all of our items to go over in the very beginning, and I'd like to pass this over to you so you can dive into networking for career growth.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. A pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to chat with you all today. I'm Matt Vartstra. I am one of our career advisors at the National University Career Services Department here. So very excited to be talking to you today about networking for career growth and job opportunities. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type them in the chat. Emily's going to be kind of gathering them. We'll stop kind of more formally for questions about halfway through and then at the end as well. So please feel free to ask questions. I'd be happy to address anything that you have that you'd like me to expand upon, or different questions that come up regarding networking as we're kind of jumping in. There's a lot of stuff that I want to kind of cover, so I will dive in pretty quickly to the content. But here is kind of an outline of what we're going to look at today, just so you know what's coming up for the next hour here. We're going to cover types of networking, and then we're going to bring in kind of social media. This is more specifically kind of LinkedIn. I'm not going to cover a lot on LinkedIn because I feel like that's a whole nother presentation, but we can definitely touch on it for sure and talk about its uses and kind of the more broad spectrum stuff on LinkedIn and other kind of social media pieces for networking. We'll discuss kind of the purposes of networking, how you can prepare to network, how to craft, or initially at least how to think about and why an elevator pitch is important to have. We'll talk about kind of where you can start from a networking perspective. If you're having trouble with okay, I've got these ideas, I want to network, I have a purpose, I'm ready to go. What am I going to do? We'll kind of get into that. And we'll end by covering some kind of common networking do's and don'ts. So hopefully that will provide some good information for you. And again, please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. You might be wondering, why are we defining networking to start? And I think why I wanted to stick with a definition for networking to kick things off is I feel like a lot of people throw the term networking around. I feel like a lot of people know like what networking is in general, which is right. It's relationship building for professional growth. I mean, that's what it's all about. But I think the key terms that I want to hone in on what is networking is that when you're building those professional relationships, it's about the connections that those relationships create, right? And oftentimes I feel like maybe that's a missed portion of what networking is. You're like, okay, so I networked with this person and then I've done it. Like I've done the networking thing, right? I'm like, yes, but the whole goal of networking is you have networked with a person, right? We'll talk about maybe how are you going to do that. And then that person is also connected with lots of other people, right? And then those people are connected with lots of other people. And so when you connect with one person, you're actually connecting with their network, who's then connecting with their network. And the whole point of networking becomes the connections that you create within a group of people. And then when you need to take advantage of a network, or when you can contribute into a network, you're making a much larger impact, or having a much larger impact than you may otherwise have that you might think, right? And so when your network starts to grow and you start to build your network even by little bits and pieces, don't forget that you're actually growing something much, much larger than you might perceive that you're actually growing. And places like LinkedIn actually kind of help you see that. And so we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into kind of the social media piece as well. The other piece of what is networking that I think is critical to think about and to remember, and we'll touch on this throughout the presentation today, is that not only we're looking to develop a network, but we're also looking to maintain that network. If you make a connection and then never connect with that person again, or you wait, a year even to have any sort of additional connection point with them, yes, you did a thing and you made a connection, you maybe created the initial start of a relationship, but that relationship will not be very fruitful for you unless it's maintained in some way, shape, or form. And so as you're thinking about the networking process and going through and building your network up or even utilizing your network, when was the last time you touched base with those people in your network, right? And how can you then go about the maintaining of that network in addition to developing it, right? And there are obviously nice tools out there nowadays, like LinkedIn, for commenting on a post that you see someone make and keeping that a warm contact, right? There are nice pieces of the puzzle where when you're like, oh, you know what? I haven't messaged that person in a while. You don't have to necessarily like schedule a meeting with them or call them, or like you could fire them a quick LinkedIn message even, right? And just be like, hey, just want to check in, see how things were going since the last time we talked. Maybe you read a cool article, you can share it with them. Like all of these different things can be used to maintain those relationships over the course of time so that when you need to utilize that network, it's there for you in the way that you need it to be. This is a slide I'm going to spend a little bit of time on because there's quite a few things I want to maybe kind of have hopefully jump out at you. When we talk about types of networking, I think most people go to like, okay, so we've got like the in-person events, we've got kind of social media and the online world of networking. One thing that I like to make mention of to emphasize that there are two, in my opinion, kind of other types of networking. And that's planned or intentional networking versus kind of your spontaneous or happenstance networking. And so really what I mean by that is there are events that are very specific to networking. There are you set up a phone call with someone to network with them. Like that is very planned. It is very intentional networking. You go to a career fair. It's very planned. It's very intentional. But there are a lot of opportunities to be spontaneous and have happenstance networking occur as well. And so I think that it's really critical that we're aware, especially if you're in a job search process, that you're aware of what situations do you find yourself in throughout the day? What kind of situations do you find yourself in on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis in your life where that happenstance networking can occur? And I'll tell a story later on, and some of you, if you've been in any presentation I've given on networking or job searching, have probably heard it, but there are so many great opportunities to connect with people when you're just in a space of, well, I'm in a job search process or I'm looking to advance my career in some way, shape, or form. Who am I around? Who am I talking to? And am I talking about the right things that they could potentially be part of my network and or could be useful in the search that I'm doing or whatever that may be. So I think you want to be aware of obviously doing planned and intentional networking, but also what are those kind of spontaneous or kind of random or happenstance pieces that might come into play during the course of a job search or the course of you looking to advance your career or find a mentor or whatever it might be from a networking perspective that you might want to take advantage of. When we're talking about kind of standard in-person versus social media pieces, you've got in your in-person side, you've got your kind of standard fare. And so career fairs are one of those kind of big pieces of the puzzle. If you're not aware, the Career Services Office does host career fairs. We host them virtually through the Handshake platform, and I'll have instructions for Handshake at the end of the presentation as well. We have an teacher kind of educator career fair that coming up here at the very beginning of March. Registration for that will open in February. So if you're in Handshake, you'll be able to see and access that career fair. We're also going to pilot this year later in the fall an all majors career fair. And so it will be all majors, all levels up into grad and all of that stuff. That will be in the fall at some point. So, stay tuned for more information on that as well as we kind of roll out additional career fairs through that. Beyond that, be aware of local stuff that's happening. There's other virtual fairs that oftentimes will happen within industries. And so pay attention to maybe professional associations and different things that might be putting on career fairs. But locally, career fairs happen on a pretty regular basis if you're paying attention. A lot of media outlets, so if you're talking like radio, TV, newspaper, those types of outlets like to host local career fairs. And so those are, again, places where you can connect. Potentially, if there's, a company that's attending one of those fairs that you're interested in, maybe the focus of the fair is not on the types of jobs that you're looking for, but if that company is of interest to you because maybe in a different space they hire, for different people, there might be connections to be made there, right? And so there's opportunities to jump in and do a lot of that. Career fairs are really nice from a networking standpoint because you get to practice a lot in a very short period of time your 30-second introduction, your elevator pitch. You get to practice kind of having that conversation with people. And so if you want to get really good at networking, attend a career fair, because you're going to talk to however many different people. It could be 10, 15, however many different companies you might go visit. The opportunity to practice your pitch, to have that conversation, and to get used to having that type of back and forth dialogue is really valuable, and career fairs provide a space to do that. I think one of the best places, and especially when we get into kind of, when you're in a master's program, when you're in a PhD program, one of the best places to network is at association conferences. They're almost built to be networking events, right? Yeah, there's professional development, and there's sessions to attend, and there's things to do. There's all kinds of stuff that goes along with a conference. But the backbone, I feel like, of most association conferences is putting people together who have similar interests, who work in a similar field, and letting you mingle and network, right? And so in particular, if you're somebody who's more introverted or who doesn't like to go out and seek those types of opportunities, and maybe networking doesn't come naturally to you, career fairs, obviously, they're like literally built to have you do that. And then association conferences are another place where that just happens so naturally, and everyone is kind of there to do it, that you kind of fall into like, oh, everyone, like, I'm just doing the thing that everyone else is doing. And so it becomes kind of an easier place to do those sorts of things. Pay attention to alumni events. Alumni events are great places to connect with people maybe that have graduated from the program you have, or in the field or anything like that. So take advantage of those. The NU Alumni Association also has what's called the Mentor Me program. And so if you're interested in finding a mentor, or you're interested in being a mentor, you can join that program. That all is hosted through the Alumni Association website. You can also find it through our website in Career Services. The Mentor Me program is definitely something that's great to take advantage of.
Dr. Vartstra, if you don't mind, this Mentor
Yeah,
Me program did come up. Would it be okay if I include a direct link to that program in the follow-up
absolutely.
email? Okay,
Yeah, please do, Emily. Yeah,
thank you.
that'd be great. Yeah. Volunteer opportunities are another space where you can really put yourself into an opportunity connect, especially if you're looking for local connections, right? If you're new to an area or something like that, volunteering locally is a great way to kind of get involved in what's happening at a local level. And so that can be a space to kind of be in the networking zone in an in-person way. I always throw this in there because I think that this is something that, again, when you're talking about kind of happenstance networking or that spontaneous networking, the clerk at the grocery store, your hairstylist or your barber, like, these are people who talk to folks all day long, and you have no idea who sat in that chair before you, or who came in line before you, or is going to come in line after you, right? And so there is information, there is connections to be made, right, with the people that you interact with on a regular basis. And so, have that conversation with them. Oh, yeah, right now I'm in a job search process, right? Let them know what you're looking for. It might come to nothing. It might be like, oh, you know what? So-and-so, like 2 people ago, like, it works in that field. Like, I bet you I could get their number for you. Like, okay, cool. That'd be great. Right. And that kind of thing can happen. So just be aware of those opportunities, right? On the social media side, LinkedIn is kind of going to be your bread and butter. There's obviously a million different, and literally probably there is so many that you can't name them all at this point, different social media things that you could possibly be doing. Could all of them be useful from a professional standpoint? Maybe. I think you could argue that you could make use of them from a professional standpoint. You certainly want to have a professional presence on them if you are active in social media, making sure that your privacy settings are up appropriately, making sure that you're posting appropriate things, because if you are putting something on the online, it is most likely searchable, and people will in fact Google search you. And so one of my tips is Google search yourself. If your name happens to be Matt Vartstra and you're like one of the only Matt Vartstras in the world, I could just Google search my name and the stuff about me pops up, and I can see what people would see about me online. That allows me to kind of really police my profile and make sure that I know what's out there on me, and delete anything that I don't want, or old stuff, and make sure that people are pointed towards the right things. If your name is a little more common, then you might have to add some descriptors next to your name when you're searching, maybe the university or previous job title you held or something, and that will get you kind of the search results you're looking for. But that allows you to know when somebody's going to Google search you, and they most assuredly will if you're in a job search process, what comes up about you, what is out there online for you. And that becomes why LinkedIn is such a great tool, because LinkedIn is now your digital place to live professionally, right? If one of the first things that pops up when I Google search you is your LinkedIn profile, and it's basically just a reflection of your resume in digital format with some extra stuff in there. And again, we could talk a lot about the little details about LinkedIn, but you want to have that professional presence online because people will run that search. People will Google search you when you're in a job search process, especially if you're a candidate in their pool. Most recruiters are going to, at some point in the process, probably do that. And so you want some level of control over what they might see. And so that's something you can test yourself as well. Handshake is another space where this happens a lot. So there's a lot of connections that can be made on Handshake. Handshake's got its own job board. Handshake functions very, very similarly to LinkedIn. And so if you're on LinkedIn and if you're doing LinkedIn things, copy paste all that stuff over into your Handshake profile. Make sure you're functioning in that space as well. And one of the beauties of this from a job search standpoint is people can then find you, right? When you're there and you're digitally searchable, if somebody's looking for you from a recruitment standpoint, people will message you on Handshake. It happens on a regular basis. I think on LinkedIn it does as well. But I get messaged on Handshake because I keep my profile public from employers on a pretty regular basis, to be honest. For someone who's not looking for a job, people are doing searches. If your skill set pops up within that search from your profile, you might get a message from somebody with a potentially cool opportunity. So be aware of those things. Association websites are really valuable. Be on those websites. There are forums you can participate in. There are other places within the association beyond just being a part of their conference that you can, obviously be a part of a networking space from an online standpoint, but also from, webinars that you might attend, different things like that, where you can connect with people in addition to the conference or outside of the conference. So take advantage of those as well. All right. I want to just continue touching on social media in the job search really quickly, and this is really my final slide on kind of online stuff. So if you have questions, I might pause kind of shortly after this just to take some if you have any kind of more of the social media types of questions. Use social media to your advantage. Showcase your significant wins, your skills, your accomplishments. Make sure your profile is filled out. Make sure that you're searchable. Put those things out there. But also be strategic about your timing and your information sharing. If you're like constantly putting that stuff into that space, it's very easy to then become unfollowed or unconnected with people because you're flooding their feed with things that they're like, okay, wow, like this is like every day, right? So just be aware of your timing and of that sharing piece of it. In addition, within LinkedIn, you can actually kind of help yourself in this way. If you're making changes to your LinkedIn profile specifically, there's actually a setting that you can go into and you can actually turn off notifications to people. If you do not turn off notifications to people, every change you make to your LinkedIn profile will be announced to everyone that you're connected with. So it'll be like, oh, well, like you changed the dates on a job and LinkedIn thinks you got a new job or something like that. And it will push that out to everybody. Or if you put a new skill in, LinkedIn will be like, hey, so-and-so put a new skill in. So if you're updating your LinkedIn profile, use that setting to make sure it's not pushing out every change you make over to the people that are in your connected network. You can turn it back on again after you've updated your profile if you want to have it share out when you do make a major change or a job change or something like that. You can always do that. I tend to just leave mine off if I want to announce to my LinkedIn connections that something has happened that I feel like is worth having mentioned. I will do it via a post in LinkedIn rather than having LinkedIn actually do it for me. So that's just something to be aware of on that side of things. I kind of mentioned this already, but clean up and update your digital footprint. Make sure your LinkedIn, your Handshake are up to date. Do that Google search on yourself. Check to see what's out there on you. If you're like me and your 2 decades old MySpace profile showed up when you did a Google search on yourself, I was like, huh, I didn't even know that still existed. I then went through the process of getting it deleted, so that no longer shows up on the searches. I wasn't using it, and it was just a distraction for anyone who was going to do a search on me. So you could be aware of that type of thing if you do, Google search on yourself. LinkedIn can be a great tool, and other social medias can be a great tool for research as well. So if you're looking to do that research, and beyond that, I think from a LinkedIn standpoint, what's nice is you can actually research the connections that your connections have. And this is where the networking portion of LinkedIn really comes into play, which is if you're looking at a particular company that you're interested in connecting with, getting a job at, whatever it is, LinkedIn will show you if any of your connections have connections there, right? Like you can actually see that through LinkedIn. And so you can do a little bit of digging, you can do a little bit of research on those connections, on how your network is kind of trickling out. Do you know someone who knows someone at that particular company that could get you an introduction? You can find that out by talking with them or by communicating with them and asking that question, or LinkedIn will kind of just tell you that. And so you can jump in and see who's connected to who and see if that you have any company connections, that you might not have known of directly through LinkedIn. And so it can be a research tool on your network itself, because there's no way you can know who's everyone is connected to. This is it's too big of a connection network. But LinkedIn kind of tracks all that for you. And so then you can find out where those connection points go. Connect with people. Use the connect feature. Send a personal message with it. If you're readily acquainted with the person, I mean, I just press the connect button. Like get your connections growing by just pressing it. But if it's someone that you just met or someone that you're looking to connect with that maybe you're not well acquainted with at all, you can type a personal message to them when you hit that connect button, right? Hit connect, type a personal message that you can send to them. Hey, really excited about finding you on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect. And be able to share, articles back and forth, or, take advantage of each other's networks or whatever it is, right? So you can send them a personal message to create and foster that connection. In fact, it's always almost a good idea to send that personal message. You're much more likely to get a connection out of that. When I get a connection request, if it's blank and there's nothing there, I'm like, how do I know you? And I have to click on you, got to do some work. And some people just aren't willing to do that work. And so if you send a personal message, you're like, oh yeah, that's where I met that person, or that's where I know that person from. That's an easy connect for people, right? So make it easy for people to press that accept button when you send a connection request on LinkedIn. Be active on LinkedIn. If you're in a job search process and if your connections are posting things, comment back on that. Comment on how interesting you found the article that they linked to. Comment, be engaged, be active there. Post yourself. If you find a cool article, right? Post that article. If you have an opinion on something happening in your industry, post that, right? You can foster engagement and activity within your LinkedIn network by doing those types of things. If you're like, wow, I don't see anything that I could comment on LinkedIn maybe so much, join groups. That's a great way to start to get your feed to kind of post with things that are in your industry. Join interest groups that are similar to yours, industry groups that are similar to yours. You can also follow companies. I like the idea of, if you're in a job search and you've got your top 10 list maybe of companies that you want to work for, probably be following all those companies on LinkedIn, because if I search for you and go to your LinkedIn profile, when I see your application come through my system, and then I see that you're following my company, I know that you're actually legitimately interested, right? I'm like, oh, cool. Like, I'm seeing a lot of connections here where it shows that you're really interested in what we're doing, including that you followed me and my company on LinkedIn. So little things like that, I think, can help in that space as well. It also, there's just the amount of knowledge that is contained within LinkedIn because of the people that are there and the connections you can make and the people posting, best practices for this new thing in the industry. There's so much you can take in on LinkedIn. It becomes kind of a professional development resource for you. Obviously you have to kind of grain of salt all of that because it comes, from, these people. But if you know the people and you can cross-check that information, you can get a lot of great knowledge out of LinkedIn as well. Before I move on, I'm going to pause for questions here because the rest of it is going to kind of dive into more in-person networking tips, but it's not exclusive to that. But in case there are questions on anything we've covered so far, I'll pause and see if anyone has questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bartstra. And if anybody does, feel free, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat or the Q&A, of course. I did want to point out, I did put in the chat a couple of links. I'd like to thank the Director of Career Services for providing me the Mentor Me link quickly. So I did put that in there. That's and I'll put it in the follow-up email as well too. But because Dr. Vartstra was talking about LinkedIn, I wanted everyone to know there are resources for LinkedIn Learning for all of our NU population as well too. And so as you're working to network, you might see other things that a future company is interested in that you might want to work at. And you might think to yourself, maybe I should take this certificate and then post it on my LinkedIn Learning that I had earned this LinkedIn learning tutorial. Maybe it's some sort of certification that you're looking to earn to maybe make yourself more attractive in that networking capacity. Just thought I'd throw that out there. But that's it for right now. No questions at this time.
Okay. And if you have questions, again, continue to use the chat function. If you have questions that are maybe even more specific to like your scenario or things that you would like to connect with a career advisor on, again, at the very end of the presentation, I'll have information on how to connect with us and be able to schedule an appointment with a career advisor if you want to talk to your specific job search situation or network or career situation. We're always happy to have those conversations in career services. So that information will be at the end if you want to connect with us more specifically as well. Okay. It's going to reset. We're going to talk about the purpose of networking. And the reason we're going to mention this really quickly and then kind of jump into kind of how do you prep to network is because when you're preparing to network and when you're going out into a networking scenario, your goal in networking, I think, is really critical to how you prepare and also to how those conversations even happen. Is your purpose for networking, gaining inside information? Are you looking to figure out what's happening at a company when they're going to be hiring, maybe, or different things like that? Are you in job search mode? Are you looking to tap into that hidden job market? Statistics, and these stats are old, but I've wagered to say they're still true or more true. But statistics tell us that 80% of jobs are found via networking, that 80% of jobs are not necessarily posted. And you've got most companies out there. I don't know the specific numbers, but you've got a high percentage of companies that have referral programs within their company. And so they don't necessarily post jobs. The jobs are posted internally, and then they rely on referrals from internally. I worked with a company here locally. I'm in the Boise area, that for 7 years, they had come from California, and they had established kind of a secondary headquarters here. And for 7 years, while they were establishing their business here, they never posted a job once. The only way that they got candidates for their positions was through direct referrals. And finally, after 7 years, I convinced them that they had tapped that market dry and they should connect with the universities. And so that ended up working out well for us. But I tell that story because if you don't start connecting, if you don't start utilizing your network, there are really cool opportunities that could be out there that you might never see in kind of your traditional job search, where you're on there, even if they're on their company website, that might not be posted there because they might just be doing internal referrals kind of thing only. So that kind of thing, I think, is important to keep in mind. You could be looking for job search advice. You could be looking for industry advice. You could be looking for a mentor. All of these are potential reasons for networking. You could just be seeking out names for people to talk to about possible employment, and I want to take a moment, I'm going to take a moment to talk about informational interviews. Informational interviews are a form of networking and a form of connecting that I think are underutilized and incredibly powerful. An informational interview, I like to think of it as just like a coffee chat, right? And so your goal is not to ask for a job. Your goal is not really to ask for anything. You're really just looking to gain information from the person that you're having a conversation with. And so obviously there's probably ulterior motives, like you might want to get a job at that company in the future. You might actually be looking for a job, and the chance of that coming up in that conversation is actually quite high. And so, it can possibly be something that does come up. But an informational interview really is all about like, hey, can we sit down over a cup of coffee, or can we get on a Zoom call? Like, can I take 10, 20 minutes of your time just to kind of pick your brain about what is it that you did to get to where you are, right? What do you love about the company you're working for? What career path did you take to get there? All right. And it helps to provide you with information. Like if you're aspiring to go and do something or be like somebody or get a similar position to someone, ask them for an informational interview. You'd be surprised at how well received these requests are. People enjoy talking about themselves for the most part. And so when you are like, hey, I just want to talk about you. Like, can you just sit down and like tell me about you and your path and how you got there? People are like, oh yeah, like I'd be happy to do that, right? Now all of a sudden, all you did was ask for that. But if you spend 20 minutes with someone and they're willing to spend 20 minutes with you, they're going to ask you questions as well. Now they know you a little bit, they know what you're looking for, and all of a sudden you've got a great networking contact within that company, right? So informational interviews are something that I think is really powerful. I worked with a a college football player one time who wanted to get into the finance industry, and had no connections. He had no connections whatsoever. He had done a good job at school. He had focused on football in school, and he'd done those things. But career had been kind of like, now that he was going to be done, he was focused on career. And he said, I don't have any connections. And I said, let's do some informational interviews. And so he was like, where do you want to work? We set up like a top 10 list. And he's like, okay, well, do you know anyone at any of these companies? No. Okay. Well, let's do some LinkedIn searching. Let's find out who works at these companies. And then he went and did informational interviews. He probably did like 8, I think, informational interviews. And yeah, he ended up with a job at one of those companies because he created connections with them. Right. And the ask was simple. How did you get to where you are? What do you love about your company, right? Like the conversation is not around, can I get a job at your company? Probably it gravitates towards that probably eventually, right? But the focus of the conversation is not that. And that's the idea of an informational interview. And again, I think they're a very powerful form of networking. And you can even, I don't love the idea, but you can cold call ask for an informational interview, right? Send someone a LinkedIn ping and be like, hey, I'd love to connect. Moreover, I'd love to have a conversation with you about how you got to where you are. I'm an aspiring such and such, and I, know that you're very successful, and I'd love to hear kind of your tips on how to like do really well in this field, right? Oh, cool. Yeah, let's set up a Zoom call, right? And like, awesome, great. Like, can I get like 10, 20 minutes of your time? And all of a sudden you've got a great contact, right? So informational interviews, take advantage. All right, let's talk about what to do before you start networking. And so I like this because if you're me, you're very introverted. You maybe don't like thrive in a networking environment in particular. This helps to develop confidence in your process. And that's kind of my goal with these next few slides and this list of like 5 preparatory things. Like, what are you going to do to be the most ready that you can be in order to be successful in kind of creating your network, maintaining your network? So we'll talk about these 5 things in these next slides. And I think this is true of anyone who's networking or job searching, and particularly if you're in like the job search realm, make a list. What is your network? And don't hold back on this list. Your network is much more extensive than you probably realize it is. When you sit down and you really start to brainstorm, who are all the people that I am potentially connected with? And those could be really strong connections. They could be kind of loose connections, but you're connected nonetheless. Those are all components and pieces of your network. And then those people know people, right? And we talked about that connection piece and that all of the spider web that goes out from there. Classmates, faculty, family, friends, neighbors, local contacts, anybody that you're in a social group with, right? Like these are all people that could potentially be part of your network. Colleagues from current and previous jobs. And I think especially when you're in school, you're an alumni, you've got the alumni network, you've got faculty connections, you've got staff connections within the institution, you've got classmates that you've been going to school with. All of those connections start to become very powerful. And the nice thing about classmates too is they're probably in a similar boat to you. They might be looking for a career as well. And so if you're all working together and sharing opportunities and different things, there's some maybe competition there possibly, yes. But there is also great breadth in how much you can kind of spread out your network, because now all of a sudden you're all working together to create connections and to build those opportunities together. And so, take advantage of those relationships that you have established. Make sure that you're all working, together to, common goals and things like that. And moreover, make sure they know what you're looking for. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a few slides, so I don't want to get ahead of myself, but a lot of people have extensive networks that have no idea that they're looking for a job. They have no idea. Maybe they know you're looking for a job, but they have no idea what kind of job you're looking for. That's not, if they don't know, you're not really utilizing that network very well, right? So sometimes dropping information on your network is an important piece of kind of that activating your network part of the network or of the job search too. Professional organizations and clubs, we talked about that. Industry-related trade shows, conventions, conferences, volunteers that you may have worked with before, people you've learned of in your research. These can be great potential targets for networking, right? If you're like, wow, I've cited this name a lot in my thesis and my dissertation in a write-in paper that I've done. maybe that's someone that would be willing to connect with me. Like, have I reached out? What connections do I have to that person? I was able to, at one of the conferences I attended, I was able to meet somebody that I cited in my dissertation, like so many times. And it was just such a cool opportunity to be like, oh, like, and they were like, I met them through a fellow graduate student at the time who was doing a poster presentation, who was like just across the way from me doing a poster presentation. But I knew that their supervisor was this person that I had cited so many times. Like, well, I'm going to go introduce myself to them because that's an easy intro. I'm a grad student. You're a grad student. We're both doing poster presentations. Easy, right? And I'm like, then they're like, oh, here's my supervisor, and I'm like, perfect. That's who I wanted to talk to. And you make connections. And so I think it's good to think about, from a research standpoint, like who are you citing? Who could be interesting to connect with from that side of things as well. And then again, just anyone whose advice you would value. Sometimes that's just a mentor in a different capacity, right? Somebody who you look up to, and it might not even be within your field or your industry. Those are all good potential connections to be able to make. Knowing your purpose, we talked about this a little bit, so I'll go kind of quickly through this slide, but know your purpose in networking as you're getting into kind of the idea of, okay, I'm going to go and intentionally start to expand, activate, and maintain my network because of a job search process or whatever else it is. What is that purpose? Is it the job search? Is it because you're just like, you know what, I'm just getting started in the field and I don't really know exactly where I want to go within the field. Maybe I just need to talk to some people who are doing the work. It's really nice to hear it straight from somebody who's doing it. We can talk about it in career services, and we'll love having those conversations about, well, what do you want to do with your degree, or which degree do you want to do? Like, those are great conversations we can have. Go do an informational interview, hear it straight from them. It's so nice to have that conversation, to really get a feel for what they love about their job. Do I also love those things? Well, that sounds like something I would really love. I'm going to go in that direction, right? So you can get a lot of good information that way. Or are you more in the later stage of career planning? Are you literally looking for a job? Are you seeking mentorship because you already are in a career and you're looking to maybe, well, how do I maneuver my way through this industry and move up in the field? Those kind of relationships, if that's what you're looking for from networking, I think the conversations are a little bit different. And so as you start to determine your purpose for networking, I think that goes a long way in the type of conversations you have and how you have those conversations. I talk about this in just about every presentation I give, whether it's on resumes or job searching or whatever it might be. Self-research, I think, is really important. If you don't know what you're looking for, if you don't know what you offer to a company, if you haven't done this reflection of yourself, take a moment to do that as you're heading into this space where you're going to be networking. The whole purpose of networking is, yeah, to get people to talk about themselves. And we talked about that, but a lot of it is you got to talk about yourself. And so you want to be confident in sharing your stories. And if you haven't reflected on what your stories are, about what your top skills and qualities are, about what your awesome experiences and stories you want to tell from those experiences might be, reflect on that. Delve into those things. What all these things on your resume tell a story. What stories do I have to tell from these things, right? From your resume, from your CV, whatever it might be. And those can be, that's ammunition as you're starting to create your 30-second pitch, your elevator pitch, right? And any sort of conversations that you have when you're in the networking space all can flow from that, hey, I know myself. I know the cool things about me that people might be interested in hearing about. And those are the things that you want to be able to talk about. And sometimes this can be difficult, right? It's like, well, I don't personally consider what I have done very interesting because it's kind of mundane to me. I've done it. It's very like normal. That's not normal to other people. Your reality and what you have done is a completely unique story to them. And so don't get caught up in and I think a lot of people get to this space where they're like, oh, like I don't really have anything cool to talk about. And I'm like, that's just not true. Like your things that you consider boring are definitely not boring to me or to Emily or to other people because we don't know your story. We haven't heard those experiences before. It's not what we've experienced more than likely, right? Your story is unique. So like I think people have to get out of their heads a little bit and remember that if you're networking with someone who even knows you a little bit, the stories you have to tell are very interesting to them for the most part because they didn't have those stories. They don't have those experiences to talk about. So that's where as you're reflecting on yourself, think along those lines. Do some research. This is kind of I've said it several times. So again, I'll run pretty quickly through this, but research will pay huge dividends when you're in a networking space. If you know what's going on in the industry, if you know what's going on at that company, especially if you're connecting with a specific person at a company, get some company knowledge. Go to their website. What's going on in the news with them from an industry standpoint? Be up to date on those trends. Pick a couple industry topics that are maybe, cutting edge or new that are popping up to do some research on, so that if that comes up, or if you're like, wow, what topic should I come up with to introduce in this particular conversation, then you have things to talk about and you're kind of in the know. You don't have to be an expert on everything, but these are kind of conversation starters where if you know something about it, you can contribute to the conversation. I think in particular, this is helpful if you're attending a conference, because you sit down at a table for lunch. One of the best places at a conference, right? If you're an introvert and you don't know how to network at a conference, find a table of people that you don't know at lunch at a conference. Sit at that table. If you walk in early to a session, sit at a table of people you don't know. Easy. All of a sudden, you're in a networking session. People will ask you about yourself, right? Especially in those mealtime situations. If you have ideas of what's happening in your industry, you can sit down at that table and not feel like you have no idea what's happening, right? Because people will probably be talking about those things, and then you can contribute to that conversation and be ready to engage in that. So do your research. Again, industry knowledge, company knowledge, all very, very useful. And then craft your elevator pitch. Having a I hate to say pre-rehearsed, but kind of like having a pre-rehearsed elevator pitch is something that you want to have almost in your back pocket at all times. I say I don't like it pre-rehearsed because I don't want it to feel robotic. It shouldn't be like this is how I give my elevator pitch. I say it this way every single time, and it's monotone, and it's like, this is like you reading it off of a note card almost. You still want it to feel natural. But the idea of writing down your elevator pitch, of practicing your elevator pitch, is something that I would encourage. There are so many different potential times that you could use your elevator pitch. And the idea of the elevator pitch is very simple, right? Elevators are maybe faster nowadays, but back in the day, it would take 60 seconds to ride an elevator, let's say. And so how would you talk to someone if you were on an elevator with them? You had that one ride from floor 1 to floor 4, and it takes 60 seconds to get there, and you're going to be in an elevator with somebody. How would you introduce yourself to them, right? What pieces of information are most critical to get across to them? Experience, education, goals, connection points to them or their company. Those are all potentials for your elevator pitch. It's so important to have an elevator pitch ready, because you'll find yourself in scenarios where you can use an elevator pitch on a regular basis. And you really only get that one chance to make a good first impression. It gets said a lot, but it really is true. When you first meet someone, they'll probably remember you or not remember you based on what that first impression is. And so a good elevator pitch is important. And the thing with having an elevator pitch prepared is that if you're good at kind of rehearsing and you're good at kind of figuring out like what your elevator pitch will be, you can custom tailor it to different scenarios, right? It's not gonna be the same every time because the goal maybe isn't the same, the conversation's not quite the same. The tell me about yourself question in an interview is essentially just asking for your elevator pitch, maybe an expanded version of that because you have a little more than 60 seconds to answer that question probably, but it really is just kind of an abbreviated version of the tell me about yourself question. And so obviously the way you phrase that maybe is a little bit different than you would if you were meeting someone at a conference or at a career fair, right? So it changes a little bit, but if you have a decent kind of baseline that you're functioning from an elevator pitch standpoint, that will allow you to adjust that and modify it to the situation you find yourself in. Again, there's lots of spaces where you can use this. Formal events, career fairs, conferences. You can also, when you're leaving a voice message, if you're reaching out to somebody, when you're standing in line somewhere and you're like, oh, there's nothing to do, and you turn around to the person next to you, or even when you're riding on a plane. And I told you I would tell you a story about happenstance networking. And again, some of you may have heard the story before, but I was working with a student, and she wanted to get into the pharmaceutical industry, and I was in northern Idaho at the time, and the student was flying home, and funnily enough, I think the student was from San Diego, and the student was flying back from spring break, I believe, through Seattle, probably, right, to get up to northern Idaho, and she was sitting on the plane, and normally you put your headphones in, you turn on whatever, read a book, you watch a show, and you don't connect with anybody on an airplane anymore, it feels like. And we had been working together and talking about the idea of happenstance networking and the fact that she was looking for an internship, looking for a job soon because she was going to graduate. And She was like, you know what? I'm not going to stick my headphones in. I'm going to strike up a conversation with the gentleman sitting next to me. Lo and behold, said person worked for a major pharmaceutical company in San Diego. And I don't know what happened to that, but there is a perfect example of, if you're in kind of job search mode, like, take advantage of the situations you find yourself in. You might find yourself sitting next to somebody on an airplane that could make a big difference in your career trajectory. And so be aware of those happenstance places where that kind of stuff could happen. Your elevator pitch also could be used when you're sending that LinkedIn connection request. It's probably an abbreviated version of it because you don't want to fill them with too much information on a simple connection request, but definitely an opportunity to take advantage of that. What does an elevator pitch look like? This is the gist. And again, you'll get a copy of the slide deck. And again, don't like direct copy this down because you want yours to be you. You want it to be natural. You want it to be something that you feel comfortable with saying. And in this particular example inside the box there, really seems, if you read the end, right? I'm eager to learn more about your expectations and how I could be an asset to your organization. This feels like it's the answer to the tell me about yourself question, right? So it's geared a little bit towards that. That ending portion of your elevator pitch is kind of that's where you leave them with like the invitation to provide you like, okay, so I'm going to give you kind of the next thing that you might want to say, right? To allow them to kind of engage in conversation with you. So at a career fair, it might be a little bit different. I'm really interested in hearing more about your opportunities within said industry or within this particular type of position you're looking for at the company, right? So you custom tailor it a little bit, right? 5 to 6 sentences. It should be quick. You can write it down, but don't make it robotic. And that's where when you practice it, make sure that you're giving it inflection, that you're telling a story when you're doing it, and that you're customizing a little bit to that scenario, right? 30 to 60 seconds is kind of where you want this to sit as far as an introduction point. And again, I think the idea of this is you can use it in so many different places. And so if you get a good baseline, then you can kind of custom tailor it to those kind of spaces that you want to have it in. What are those big key things that you want to get across to them? Education, maybe your top experience, maybe a particular project you worked on that was really cool, maybe a particular accomplishment that you had that you want to emphasize, that shows that maybe you're particularly interested in an area that they might also be interested in, right? And that's where you can get some of that customization down as well. Okay, how do you start networking? Use your existing ties. This is, I mentioned this at the very beginning, activate your existing network. You know a bunch of people, and a lot of those people know a lot of other people, but they can't do anything for you from a job search standpoint, from a career standpoint, unless they know what you're looking for or what your purpose is in connecting with your network. If you're looking for a job, which is usually kind of the most common right way that you want to utilize to access your network, if your network doesn't know that you're looking for a job and that you're looking for a particular type of job, they can't help you. They can't contribute into that job search. And so make sure that your people know what you're looking for, right? This can be as simple as like dropping it casually in a conversation. Yeah, how are you doing? Well, I'm doing pretty good. I'm in a job search. I'm kind of looking for this type of position right now, and it's going pretty good, but I'm still looking for opportunities, right? Cool. Awesome. Like whoever that is, you just let them know that you're looking for a job and what you're looking for. Next week, they might be talking with somebody and they're like, oh, you'd be great to connect with my friend. Like, and then all of a sudden, there you go. Your network is now working for you in your job search, right? Be active in your professional organizations. They're there as networking resources for you. Be aware of your professional organizations in your field. Utilize those, whether it's through the conferences, whether it's through their websites. They all have ways to connect with people in your field. Volunteer in the community. Again, if you're looking for local contacts, volunteering is a great way to start connecting and getting local contacts in that way. And I kind of mentioned the whole, like, if you're at a conference, sit down at a table with people you don't know, because literally, like, a smile and a hi, like just walk up to someone and say, hi, how are you doing today? Like just start a conversation. And again, if you're like me and you're pretty introverted, like, it seems just awkward as all get out. You're just like, why would I go and do that? Well, I'm going to go do that because there's a purpose to what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to create connections. And if you don't put yourself out there, you will not make connections. I mean, this is just how it works, right? So be willing to put yourself in those scenarios. And I oftentimes I'll encourage people that maybe don't want to go out there, don't want to put themselves into those spaces. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? they're going to say like, oh, hey, like I'm waiting for someone. I'm busy. I'm going over here. Like, okay, cool. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Right. Like the negative pieces that could happen are so minimally impactful to you that it's easier to think about it that way sometimes from that perspective. I don't like taking a negative mind frame on stuff, but sometimes I think it helps to be able to say like, oh, you know what? Like if I walk up and say hi to this person and it doesn't go anywhere, then it doesn't go anywhere, and that's fine. That's okay. I'll try somebody else, and maybe I'll have more luck there, right? I'll even tell this to people who are in job search process. Reach out to the company, have a conversation with their HR office, talk to them about the questions you have about the positions that are available there. Ask them when the next time they'll be hiring for a position that you're looking for. Is the worst thing they could say is, I don't know, right? And oh, awesome. Well, thank you for your time. I'll be looking on your website, right? So there's a lot of ways to have those conversations, and then if it doesn't go the way that you maybe expected them to go, that's okay. You can move on from that, and then you're off and running with the next person. And the likelihood is it's probably going to be a worthwhile connection, and they're also going to want to connect, especially if you're in a space where networking is actually happening. Just be the person who puts yourself into those positions to be able to have those conversations. All right, let's end with some do's and don'ts, and then I'll hopefully leave a couple of minutes here for questions at the end. We talked about this already, but prepare and research industry trends, research the company, be ready. And again, the reason for this is confidence building. The more you know, the more information you have when you walk into a situation, you'll have topics that are worth conversating about. You'll have the ability to contribute to a conversation that's going on about some of those things because you've done the research, you know the company, you know the industry, you know the issues that are in your particular field, and so you'll be able to have those conversations. And that for me was what was one of the biggest things when I started getting into networking a little bit more, especially at conferences and in actual in-person events and things like that. I was always tentative to get involved in conversations. And once I started being like, you know what, actually, I know this stuff. I know the industry. I have things to talk about in relation to these things. It makes it so much easier to get involved in those conversations because you're confident that you actually know what's going to be talked about most of the time. You have an opinion on the things that might be talked about, or even have experienced best practices around some of the things in your field. So those are makes conversations easier. Build relationships when you're in networking mode. It's not just an introduction. It's taking a genuine interest in other people. It's asking them questions that gets them talking. And that's another thing. If you're struggling to kind of, how do I do it? Ask them questions about themselves. People like talking about themselves, right? We mentioned that. If you have a great question for them about their career path, about their company, like people will like to talk about those things. And you get them talking, all of a sudden you're talking, and all of a sudden it's just a conversation, and it's not intimidating anymore because you're just having a back and forth with somebody, right? You can watch for nonverbal signs, right, of interest or disinterest. Those are, things to be aware of. That can help you make an exit from a conversation if you need to. It can help you continue a conversation if you're like, wow, the person seems really interested in this, right? So be aware of nonverbal signs. Stay positive throughout the conversation. I was practicing, it was actually interviewing with a student once, and like every answer was negative, and I was like, why are we telling such negative stories? And that's just this person's tendency. This person's tendency was to think in that way and to tell stories that kind of had a negative kind of end. And we had to work on that. Like, how do we stay positive? I don't really need an example of how like something bad happened at the end. Like, I want an example of how something good happened at the end. And so I think sometimes that requires kind of a mindset shift. And so making sure we stay positive, I think, is important. Build strong ties before making an ask. There's a purpose to your networking, finding a mentor, moving up in the field, getting information, finding a job, but don't lead with that, right? Build a relationship, build a connection before you start making those types of things ask happen, right? And again, the amount of time that happens between those things oftentimes differs. If you're at a career fair, you're there and they're there for a very specific reason. And so you can kind of get to the ask pretty quickly, as opposed to if you're doing maybe an informational interview or something a little different, that's going to be a much different feel, right? So be aware of the situations you're in and what that might look like from introduction to ask changes based on the scenario you find yourself in. But definitely, lead in with, some sort of build to that, right? Few more do's. Maintain your network. We talked about this right off at the top. Cultivate ties when you're not job hunting. Make sure your network stays warm, if you will, right? Share articles, comment on people's things, connect with people that you haven't connected with in a while. This is, I think, the idea of just reaching out and like, hey, like I used to be really well connected with, for example, a professor that I had back in the day, but I haven't talked with them in forever. Like, I don't know, fire them a LinkedIn message, send them an email, whatever the best form of communication you have with that person is. Just be like, hey, we haven't connected in a while. I'd love to talk about what's going on, right? And literally have nothing in mind, have no agenda other than to connect with people. And these are for people you've already connected with, right? Maintain that network, make sure that that it's not like all of a sudden you're coming out of the blue, like, okay, I'm looking for a job and I need to connect with people again. And you're trying to reestablish that network. Keep the network going because it'll be much more useful to you when you then do need your network. Use your thank yous. Make sure that you're in that space of gratitude. And we'll talk in a second here about, give back to your network. And it's really, really critical that you participate in networking from a give and take space, right? If you're just taking from your network, people kind of figure that out. So participate in your network in an active way in that way. Take notes, jot down stuff. If you're a business card kind of person, if you got a business card, jot down stuff on the back. If you got your cell phone after the conversation, if you pull your cell phone out during the conversation and start taking notes, you're just taking yourself out of the moment. It's really distracting, right? So, take notes, just do it after you talk with them. And then follow up, right? If it's an in-person event, follow up on LinkedIn. If you connected online, make a note to send them another message in a little bit, right, about something, right? So have a follow-up process to keep those contacts and that relationship moving. And I honestly think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make in networking. They might do a great job networking in the space when networking is the goal, and then that's all that will happen. And that contact will just kind of fall to the wayside. And so if you maintain that connection, you're much more likely to get a lot more out of that connection and out of their network than you would otherwise. So have that follow-up established so that you can remember to do it. Lastly, a few don'ts. Don't abuse relationships. There's no kind of rule here, but don't be a pest. Persistent is fine. Pest is not. And there is a fine line between the two of those things. So just be aware of where you stand on that. And if you're like, I don't know where I stand, cool. Set up a meeting with a career advisor. We can help you gauge that. We're happy to have that conversation with you and support you in that way. Don't be selfish. Share opportunities. If you're utilizing your network to try to find job opportunities and you're seeing job opportunities, share that with your network. Contribute into your network. Introduce people to other people you know. Be a facilitator within your network because that will come back and you multiply the rewards of that by participating in your network and being active in it. You want to be that person who's doing that so that other people will then do it in turn for you. Don't ask for a job right off the bat, right? The tendency is like all of a sudden they're like, oh, like that's what we're here for, and I guess no, like I don't have that, right? So don't back them into that corner. Seek advice and suggestions. People are generous with their time. If you ask about them, if you ask for their advice and their counsel, people like to share that kind of stuff. Here's the key takeaways. I've went over most of these already. You'll get a copy of the slide deck, so I'll let you read through these as you want to. But be engaged in your network, utilize your network, grow your network, maintain it, and make sure that you know what your purpose is in accessing it, and contribute back into your network. I think these are kind of key things to remember about networking. If you would like to talk to a career advisor, go into details about your job search process, your career process, where you are, if you want to talk networking skills, tips and tricks within your industry or field, get more specific, please feel free. You can schedule an appointment with us. This is the website. You can also go to our website at careerservices.nu.edu. There's links to all of this stuff through there. If you need any assistance getting into Handshake to schedule an appointment, please feel free to reach out. All of our contact information is right there. And you can reach out to us and we'll help you get in and make sure you have the ability to connect with us through the Handshake platform. Questions?
Thank you so much, Dr. Vartstra. A couple of questions did come up in the chat, but it looks like we were able to address some of them.
Perfect.
I am going to make sure when I do the follow-up email to everyone who's registered, just that they have those links that are really important of how to access Handshake, because I'm sure we probably have some people on the call today, and I'm sure those who have registered as well too, maybe they would be very interested in learning more about that service. I think there was one thing that I wanted to point out. You've given us some really great tips on how to expand network. Someone had mentioned something in the chat about they work in an organization where sometimes they'll have people move to different places,
Mm,
that they sit next to someone who they don't know within their organization. And I think that's really interesting and a really great idea. But what I think you've given us in terms of some ideas of how to network in the virtual space, right? Because you can't just sit next to someone you don't
mhm.
know
Yeah,
in the virtual space. So you've given us some really great pointers of how to do that.
yeah. And in
Um,
reality, you sit next to everyone in the virtual space, which is kind of nice.
that's true. Mind blowing. There we go. Dr. Bartstra, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. To everyone who's in the room, thank you for coming today. Until the next time, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.